All right. I like back announcing songs as part of my thing, a bit of Rob Thomas there. Welcome along once again to Breakfast Talk. For those that just joined me or joined us, I'm Brendan Jones, the Jonesy part of Jonesy Demander at WSFM. For those who are planning on going on the hard ride later, don't forget to register at their stall. Put your name on an entry form and get yourself into the free Breakfast Talk prize draw over near the food area. The prizes will be drawn at 11:40. Also, make sure you visit the Shannon's Road Safety Marquee next to the grandstand to see some motorcycle safety videos from the Ambulance Service of New South Wales. And you might also want to check out the National Motor Vehicle Theft Reduction Council stall. Find out from them where all our bikes are going. So you might see those little green tags on your bike. They've got some great tips on how not to get your bike stolen. I would say don't leave the keys in it. That's probably the number one thing. First, let's introduce you to Duncan McRae. Duncan used to be with the RTA, but now he's with another organisation that doesn't rhyme as well as that. He's with a mob called Youthsafe, and he's going to tell us about Youthsafe and what it's about dealing with the adolescents amongst us. Duncan McRae.
Hi guys. When I was asked to talk here this morning, I was still with the RTA. I've only left them 2 weeks ago. So there are a couple of items I'd like to mention from my previous life before I move on to what I'm here to talk about today. First up, Chris, the Motorcycle Council, mentioned the abolishing of rego labels coming up the 1st of January next year. That's a really exciting thing for motorcyclists because we all hate our rego labels. A couple of things that you might have some questions about in terms of rego labels. The one that most people ask is, how do I know if I see a bike that's that I want to buy and it's just in the side of the road with a sign on it saying 10 grand nearest offer, how do I know if that bike is actually registered? The answer is that the RTA does have a free online service rego check. So if you just go to their website and type in rego check, you can actually punch in the rego number and it'll tell you if the bike is current. It'll also tell you any conditions on that bike. So if you want to check that if a bike is a learner approved bike, you can actually just go onto that website, click on the rego and go on conditions and it'll tell you if it's got an LA code, a learner approved code. So that's an important thing to know about if you're thinking about buying a bike, or if you're going to borrow a mate's bike and a mate's offered you a bike to loan for a while, at least you'll know if the thing's registered or not. The other thing I wanted to talk about with my previous hat on, my RTA hat on, is this brochure. You probably can't see it from there. It's titled ABS, Motorcycle ABS. There's a couple of stalls that have got them. The Ride It Right one, I saw them. They've got the ABS brochure. Motorcycle Council have got the ABS brochure. In the last bit of time I was at RTA, I should say RMS, they're now Roads and Maritime Services, but nobody knows what I'm talking about when I say that. When I was just towards the end of my time at RTA, I did a lot of research on motorcycle crash rates with and without ABS, and I won't bore you to death with it. Last year I talked at length about braking techniques and different myths in braking. Have a read of that because it's really interesting stuff, and I think as motorcyclists it's good if we are informed purchasers. When we go to buy a bike we know what we're talking about, and there's some really interesting facts and figures that aren't BS, they're fair income information about the benefits of ABS and some of the things that you feel when you use ABS brakes and some of the idiosyncrasies. Now, as I said, having come here and talked on behalf of the RTA for the last, I think, 6 years, I've coming up and had talks on cornering and roadcraft and all sorts of things. But this year's a bit different. This year I've changed hats. I'm now with a company called Youthsafe. Youthsafe is an organisation which is a non-government organisation, a not-for-profit organisation that is about injury prevention for young people from 15 to 25. Now, Youthsafe, about 80% of what they do is in the road safety space. They also do worker injury, they also do injury relating to sport, and also things like anti-binge drinking campaigns. Now, one of the reasons I've moved to Youthsafe is that they're very keen to look at young rider fatalities. Now, I need to talk about a couple of things relating to age and motorcycle crashes. There's a humongous amount of misinformation out there relating to motorcycle crashes and the demographic. This year we've had a really, really bad year for motorcycles. There's been a significant increase. Last year I think the combination of the wet weather we had and a whole bunch of the other factors, motorcycle crashes dropped quite a bit last year. This year it's looking at being one of the highest on record. Now, if you just look at the pure fatality numbers, the majority of fatalities are the over 40 set. And on just raw information, people start freaking out about that and going, oh, there's an aged rider problem. There's this big issue with maturing riders crashing, and there's this big issue with returning old farts that are having a second coming and deciding to get into motorcycling at 50 for having a holiday for 20 years. And so there's a lot of hype out there in the motorcycle media, in motorcycle hangouts about age crashes being the problem. To put it into perspective, yes, more than 60% of the deaths on motorcycles are people over 40. So yes, in terms of raw numbers, older riders are dying at a much greater rate than younger riders. But you've got to remember that they actually own 80% of the motorcycles. So the reality is that because of the baby boom wave, the average motorcyclist in Australia is well into their 40s. Motorcycling is I just look around. Mark tried to find me earlier and he was looking for a guy with a beard and grey hair. And bit of a hard gig to do that round here. There's about 1,000 of them. And so motorcycling is an older guy's activity at the moment, but when you actually look at the crash rates on the number of injuries per registered bike in relation to age, young riders are actually a much higher crash rate. Let me put that into perspective. For the over 40 set, for people over 40 on bikes, there's about 100 crashes per 10,000 registered bikes. Okay, so that's pretty constant from 35, 40 onwards. It's about 100 crashes per 10,000 bikes. For the under 25s, it's about 300 crashes per 10,000 bikes. So that means a rider under 25 is about 3 times more likely to have a crash than an over 40s rider. And for the under 21 rider, it even gets worse. It goes to about 700 times greater to 700 times, which is 700 crashes per 10,000 licences. So we need to, because I look at this as it's everybody's issue, because it's going to affect new riders and old riders and everybody in the motorcycling community. Because we do ride with people of a range of ages. I ride with guys that are in their 60s, I ride with guys that are in their 20s. And when you actually look at why young riders are crashing, it's really interesting, because part of why they're crashing, I mean the simple answer is you just say inexperience, but have a look at where they're going for information and where they're riding trying to get experience, and they're going out with older riders. And so one of the things, when I started looking into this, one of the things that blew me away was the number of young riders that crashed trying to keep up with older riders. They got sucked in by a guy who might look old and grey but can still go Mach 5 on his GSX-R 1000, and young guys trying to keep up. And in fact, it's even more stealth when the guy's going Mach 5 on his GSA 1200, and the young guy's trying to keep up. So the first thing I'd say is, if you're an old guy, and I say that nicely in the over 40 set because I go into that demographic, if you're an old guy and you've got younger riders riding with you, don't suck them in, right? Because if you suck them in, who's going to be standing there at the side of the road bringing the ambo? And if you're a young guy, don't get sucked in by the bloke that makes it look easy, because he's been doing it for 30 years. And when you've been doing it for 30 years, it is relatively easy. Mind you, you still make the same mistakes that you did when you were 20, but because you get sucked in by your other mate. But there's the first thing I want to say is, when you ride with someone, be aware that you do suck people in accidentally, unintentionally. We've all done it. We've all been bopping along and had someone else that's tried to keep up with us. The next thing I want to talk about is how we impart knowledge. I've heard, having been in road safety now 25, 30 years, the number of times I've heard conversations at coffee shops were just an absolute load of rubbish, where some bloke's expounding all his worldly knowledge onto this young guy on his P's and saying, maybe even the young guys on his L's and saying, oh, mate, you should have hung the knee off in that corner. And he's trying to impart this knowledge, which is just light years ahead of where the kid's at. So if you are giving advice to young riders, think about what you're telling them. Think about where they're coming from. Think about how much experience they've had. Think about what their real needs are. Now, same on the flip side of being a young rider, don't just take everything you hear from an older guy as gospel. Don't think, oh, that guy's super quick, so everything he says is just absolutely gold, because it might be a load of rubbish, because there is a lot of myths out there. So I would say, if you're taking advice, listen to it carefully, work out how it works for you, and talk to other mates about it. Get more information. And if you're giving advice, think about what you're saying and who you're saying it to, because that's something out that's catching a lot of young riders out, just trying things that are just way beyond their skills and experience. The last one I want to talk about is just think about the young riders' limitations. For things like their ability to sit on a bike for a few hours. Now, I remember when I was on my learners, I went for a ride with a couple of guys that I met at a party, and they'd been riding for years, and they asked me for a ride, and I didn't even know that the route they were talking about. It was an 850k loop we were doing. The most I'd ever done at that point in time was about 50 k's in one hit, right? And we're heading up the Putty Road, and I'm going, so when are we turning back? Oh, mate, we've only just started. Right? And I was absolutely, totally and utterly shagged at the end of that ride, and I'm just amazed that I didn't crash. Because these guys had no idea about how inexperienced I was, and how heading out on an 800k plus day just totally and utterly was beyond my level. Right? So think about it, If you're going out with young riders, think about, yes, they're not going to be able to punch out 800k days. They're not going to be able to maintain high levels of concentration for the period of time you are. And same with the young riders. If you go and ride, don't get sucked in like I did. That's Dillsville, I tell you. If you're going for a ride with some guys you've never met, or you haven't done any big rides with them, say, where are we going? How far is it? And if they start talking, we should be back by 8, 9 p.m, start asking some more questions. So I just want you to think about those three things, In terms of young rider safety, it's everybody's responsibility. It's us older riders, it's the younger riders. It's about thinking about not sucking people in and not getting sucked in. It's thinking about giving good advice and listening to good advice. And it's thinking about knowing their limitations and knowing your limitations. So that's what I want to talk about. Look us up on the website. We've got a whole lot of resources in the youth safety space. So it's youthsafe.org. And thanks. See you next year.